We first noticed Asher was having difficulties with learning when he was about 5. We ended up having him privately tested, and of course it came back that he was dyslexic. It was super overwhelming. There was just list and list of all these programs. So we started talking to people and felt like everybody was just saying something different. I hired the lady that had tested him. She tutored him for a year, one-on-one, 4 days a week. She came to me and was like, it's not working. Thankfully, she had met Dr. Conway. She just highly suggested the Morris Center. From there, my husband and I got in touch with the Morris Center, and Dr. Conway spoke with us over the phone, and you could just really tell his expertise in dyslexia.
Enroll your child or teenager at themorriscenter.com, or for virtual sessions, visit nowprograms.com.
This is a production of the Ultimate Homeschool Radio Network. Welcome to the Vintage Homeschool Mom Show. Your host, Felice Gerwitz, is an author, a publisher, and your radio show host. She will encourage, educate, and inspire you with answers to your most pressing questions, from homeschool, marriage, parenting, and much more. Felice loves to equip moms to live a Christian life because every moment counts. Be sure to visit her website at mediaangels.com. And here's your host, Felice Gerwitz.
Hey friends, Felice Gerwitz here. Well, do you love homeschooling? So do we. That's why we're celebrating 11 years at the Ultimate Homeschool Podcast Network. We're one community with many family-oriented podcasts growing together. We want to give a shout out to our birthday sponsors, CTC Math, Now Programs, Engineer Concepts for Youth, and Med Transcripts. Visit the Ultimate Homeschool Podcast Network.com, click the birthday banner at the top, and grab your freebies, and explore what our sponsors have to offer. Join the celebration today, and you'll be blessed. Welcome to today's podcast. The topic is Why Homeschooling Works. This is episode 540, and you can find the show notes at vintagehomeschoolmoms.com. I also want to give a shout out to our episode sponsor, and that is nowprograms.com. Visit the website for more information. Well, many of you know that Homeschooling Works. You've been doing it for some time. Maybe you're new to homeschooling. But one thing I realized early on is that the worst day homeschooling beats the best day of traditional school. Take it from me, I was a traditional school teacher. I taught for a couple of years, and I realized early on, before I had my children, that while I didn't even know about homeschooling, something had to change because the system was broken. So I heard about homeschooling from a friend, and I began homeschooling, and that was 1986. And it wasn't as popular or well-known then. In fact, the children and I rarely went out to do errands, and the reason is we'd be asked all kinds of questions, such as, oh, do the kids have the day off? Or, what is going on? Why are your kids home? And when I said we homeschooled, some people asked, well, what's that? So I realized that I needed to just stay at home and school and not go out and field all those questions. Well, today homeschooling is much more well known, and people don't have the difficulties that we faced early on. And the question is, why does anyone care if a parent decides to homeschool? Consider this. I believe parents are the best teachers for their children based on the simple premise, and that is, parents love their children more than strangers in any classroom. As a single woman and teacher, I really liked my class. I cared about the kids. But if you asked me if I loved them, I'd say, probably not. I wanted my students to excel because selfishly, it reflected on my ability to teach. Let's be honest. There are great teachers out there. There are great teachers who care. But no one cares as much as a mom and dad cares for their kids. Why was there such a block to homeschooling? Why was it illegal for so long? Why is it still illegal to homeschool in certain countries? Well, here in the U.S., it was a loss of state and federal dollars. And believe me, the school board spends an inordinate amount of our taxpayer dollars. And a lot of times it's on programs none of us would want our children to attend. Teachers, unfortunately, are not the recipients of these funds. There are horror stories of neighbors calling social services or reporting children as truant when they went outdoors to play after they finished their schoolwork in the early days of homeschooling. Not only that, but some states made it extremely difficult to homeschool, and some states still do. While I was blessed that the laws were already in place legislatively when I began, it was still disheartening that there were battles to fight, such as the ability for homeschool kids to play sports in public and private schools. With my last 3 children, I had 5, 2 older and 3 younger. Finally, the homeschool leagues were still going on, but in our area, they never really took off, and the laws changed once again in our favor. And finally, my children were allowed to play in the local high schools and private schools, and then 2 of them played in college. And we were really blessed for all of the pioneers in the movement. I feel like this old soul recounting a better time in my life, but truthfully, the beginning of my homeschool journey was a bit stressful. I had a learning challenged child, and it took a long time to teach some of my children to read well and independently. I had different types of learners, all very bright, but some took educating outside of the box. The upside is that I homeschooled for 32 years when all 5 were done, and they all benefited from homeschooling. Praise God, homeschooling is legal in all 50 states, and on my show notes, I have an interactive map that you can click on the link detailing the state's laws and regulations. So, why is homeschooling so important? I have advocated for homeschooling for many, many years at state and local conferences. I've written homeschool books, and I truly have to say that I didn't believe that all people should homeschool. I mean, I'm blessed that I have a functioning family, and there are so many families out there that are struggling and need help. Either the mom needs support or the dad needs support. And I've met all types of people that are homeschooling. But I decided early on that while I was an advocate for homeschooling, and this is what our family did, I was going to be supportive of personal decisions that people made. After all, you're the parents, and it's up to you to decide what's best for your family. Lately, however, I think homeschooling is more important than ever. If you've never considered homeschooling and you just kind of found this podcast in your travels, please pay attention to what is going on. It's happening all across our nation, at school board meetings, at hearings. There has been so much fighting just for parental rights. Instead of fighting for the right to homeschool, we watch as some parents who have chosen public or private school fight for the rights to be parents with authority. On ballots, very often, parental rights are in jeopardy, and it's just beginning. There's an abortion amendment here in Florida, and as I record this, the election hasn't happened yet. One line in that amendment really struck me to the core, and it said that parents would be notified if their underage daughter wanted an abortion, but they didn't have to give their permission. To me, that's a Pandora's box of the next thing that will be on the ballot, which will ask for us to give up more of our parental rights. I believe a society that does not care about our faith, values, morality, or sovereignty is pushing for the hearts and minds of our children, and I've podcasted on that topic before. I heard some horror stories just within the space of a week, which really prompted me to do this podcast. One is a friend of mine who was recounting that with her grown children, she decided to go back into the classroom. She had a teaching degree. And she said one of the reasons she went back was on the website of this private school. It said that disobedience would not be tolerated. Well, she has a student in her 4th grade class who is really keeping her from teaching the other children because he's so disobedient. He's unruly and he's unchecked. And when she sends him to the office, the option is he can go be with his mother, who's a kindergarten teacher, or stay in her classroom. And she said this child is so unruly she can't subject the kindergartners to him. And her husband has offered that she step down, and she doesn't want to leave the other kids alone the rest of the year. It's so hard for teachers today, especially if the administration is not backing them. This happened to me when I was teaching, and I really had to appeal to the parents and the grandparents of my students in order to keep the kids in check. The other was tremendously worse. It was a mother saying that her 12-year-old had been groomed and transitioned out of her gender without her knowledge or consent. And it started with puberty blockers. If the parents disagreed, the child was going to be taken by social services. This mother was heartbroken. She wasn't able to minister to her daughter's needs because this happened behind her back. And she really questioned whether or not her daughter really wanted to transition. There are famous and wealthy people who also have talked about this. The professionals, typically psychologists, issue advice to parents. This is sometimes true, but not always. And sometimes the parents are coerced into giving permission because they're afraid for their children's lives. I know that parental permission is not required in some states, and that's horrible and dangerous, but that is the situation at hand. It has gone from the classroom into the lives of each one of us, into our homes. Some bad actors in some states want control over our children, and often it's blamed on the failure of the family. The true blame lies in all of us doing nothing and sitting back while our rights are destroyed. If I had to pick one reason to homeschool beyond many others, I would just say parental rights are at the forefront, and that remains in the battle to homeschool families. One of the things I haven't looked into, and I'm going to be looking into it more and more, is that many homeschool families have vouchers. They accept federal money for school. So there are lots of options out there. There's school choice, there are charter schools, and I'm happy there are options for parents who financially can't homeschool and must work. But what is the cost of that? And no one really knows at this point. I did come up with a list of why homeschooling works, and here's why. I want you to look at this list. There's 15 topics, and add to it. Think about why you would want to homeschool. If you had a wish list of what homeschooling would look like to you and the reasons why you would homeschool, what would it be? The first is the ability to teach your faith. I have to say, I started out for academic reasons because of my oldest son, but I immediately found that I could instill our faith. We could pray as a family before we started school. We could attend church if we wanted to. We could do all kinds of faith-based activities, read the Bible in the morning. And so that was, and soon became, my main reason for homeschooling and continuing to homeschool through the years. The second was the ability to teach our family values. What did we, the Gerwitz family, think was important? What did we think was not as important? What did I want and my husband want our children to know and learn by the time they left our home? I'm probably going to repeat myself a little bit, but I remember my husband saying to our kids this is a safe place for you. Home is where we are and where we'll always be here for you. And they realized our values of loving each other, loving God, and putting our family, God first, each other, spouse, and then kids. And the kids learned that. The third was family first and family time. We made a huge effort. Every Friday was our day where we'd have pizza and movie night or game night. And so that was something that we cherished. The fourth was control over our homeschool decisions, what books we decided on and what curriculum. And I am blessed again to live in a state where we had autonomy over these decisions. And that was such a blessing because I had to design a curriculum that would work for my son who struggled. When we started, there wasn't a lot of books available. The fifth is control over our educational choices and subjects. For our literature classes, I could pick some really good literature topics that perhaps were not the favorites or the ones used in the public schools or even some of the private schools, but they were books I wanted my children to read, and they really excelled in that area. Or we could teach a government class that I thought would be very important. We did a whole session on elections and really understanding how our legislation works. These are things that you can do with your kids. The ability to discipline was number 6. We had the choice as homeschool parents to say, and I remember my 2 oldest especially, were, the boy and girl often did not get along. And I could just say, you know what, we're not going to school today. We're actually going to stop. And you two are going to have to work it out. Because someday you're going to be up against people that you may not agree with, but you can't act like this. You can't be out of control. You have to be able to work out your differences. And that was something that we were able to do. I was able to discipline and punish my children. The 7th is adjusting school to your child's need and pace. One year, we had to repeat an entire math curriculum with my son. He just wasn't getting it. Again, this is my oldest. And so I was able to say, this book isn't working. I'm going to start another book, and we're going to see how that works. And it worked much better for his needs. He also had some remediation, and we were able to fit that in. Number 8, one-to-one instruction. This is invaluable. If you need to work closely with one of your children, you can. 9th, and this is one of my favorites, is a flexible schedule. I get ideas, and some of my children loved it, and some of my children who need to know ahead of time did not. But some days we would be working on something, and I would say, you know what, everybody, get your backpacks. We had these backpacks that had outdoor types of things in it, binoculars and all kinds of stuff. I have a whole podcast on that. And we're going to just go to the park because I felt that we couldn't finish our activity or what I wanted to teach in our home. And the park was 5 minutes away. And like I said, my non-flexible children were like, why didn't you tell us we were going to do it? Whereas my flexible kids were like, this is awesome, and then can we go out for lunch? So there was something, added to that. The other is a happy family with less stress. My kids didn't have to stress if they had the latest tennis shoes or the clothes to fit in or whatever that was. They had lots of friends. They played sports. We had a large homeschool group. And so we did get together with other kids, but it was on our time. Number 11, it's cheaper to homeschool. Private school is so expensive. Even with vouchers, some of these schools are just ridiculously expensive. And so I found that even buying our own books, often we were able to pass them down to other children, was way cheaper. Number 12, additional field trips and greater opportunities. We planned family vacations around some of the things we were learning. And it was a wonderful way to, again, enrich their studies with other types of opportunities. Number 13, this was great for my, sports-oriented kids. Time for practice, lessons, and sports. Over the years, my kids took piano lessons. We fit that into our schedule. And then my kids that played sports, I had 3 of them playing, and that gave them time to go outside and practice. And it was wonderful. And they knew they had to get their schoolwork done ahead of time. Number 14 is hands-on instruction. A lot of times we would just forego, well, you're not going to do this lesson because it requires, a science experiment, or you're not going to do this lesson because you might have to do art. So it gave us time as a family for me to prepare ahead of time to have these things on hand, which is one of the reasons I wrote Teaching Science and Having Fun, is having things on hand as a parent, similar to if you're going to cook and bake a cake, you're not going to go out and get each item individually, right? The flour, the sugar, the eggs, the shortening, or the oil. You're going to have these things on hand. Well, the same thing with science or even art. So we were able to incorporate hands-on instruction, and I think the kids really benefited from that. We didn't just read it in a book. And then the last one is no, or I'll say less, peer pressure. There was less pressure on conforming, and I didn't have to limit or ban social media because we didn't allow our children to have cell phones until they were way older. And I know a lot of you have a lot of pressure from friends, but that was one thing that we just told our children was non-negotiable. My husband and I stood firm on that. And until they were older and maybe they were playing sports and on a bus and they needed to get back with us, or we'd need to be able to get in contact with them. So they were at least, I think my youngest was 15 when he got a phone. And I think that was pretty much the youngest any of my children received cell phones. And the thing with computers is no one had laptops and everybody worked on a big computer, or if they did have a laptop, they can only use them in the big room. And I think having protections and all that kind of stuff is great, but it is important as for our family that we kept a lid on that. And if there's something, you would add, I would say go through that list, cross out what doesn't apply, and add the things that you would add to that list. Years ago, one of my favorite and first podcasts was on the homeschool lifestyle. And the topic revolved around the fact that homeschooling was more than what we did. It became a lifestyle. And I graduated 5 kids who are now adult children who still talk fondly about their homeschool years. It was okay that they didn't know about the latest movies or the latest songs or what the stars were doing at any given moment. That was one of the complaints that one of my daughters had was, she wasn't getting some of the colloquialisms, which were pretty nasty, or some of the songs that, everybody knew. And it was okay that they dressed comfortably but weren't swayed by being in the peak of fashion. And it was okay that we joined a prayer vigil or did some kind of sidewalk advocacy because we didn't like a bill. All that stuff was okay, and it was celebrated. We celebrated Fall Harvest or All Saints Day or each of the child's patron saints. And, there were ups and downs in our homeschool journey, and that was okay as well. We worked out our differences as a family. No one went to bed angry, and I'm sorry was replaced with, will you forgive me? Okay, so these were things our children learned interpersonal connectivity, and they learned how to deal with people that they may not like, and they learned what it meant to be a real man and a real woman, and to be able to articulate their thoughts. Our home was a safe place, as my husband often reminded our children, where they could grow up with parents who loved and cared for them, and they were surrounded by family and extended family. I could go on for another hour about the merits of homeschooling, and I've spent the last 11 years first creating the Ultimate Homeschool Podcast Network, and in particular, this podcast, teaching you the merits of homeschooling, all for free. So friends, if you have a minute, I hope you stop by and share why homeschooling works in your family on this post or any questions you might have. Please check out the other podcasts at the Ultimate Homeschool Podcast Network and my website, mediaangels.com. And I pray you continue your journey successfully. Take care, God bless, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the Vintage Homeschool Mom Show. Visit Felice at mediaangels.com and thevintagehomeschoolmoms.com. Vintage Homeschool Moms is a production of the Ultimate Homeschool Radio Network.